when I started thinking about doing this talk, my first question to myself was, well, being that I know quite a lot about Rome, what was Britain like before the Romans arrived?
That's dynamite.
And where I got to with my research was that it was a dynamic, expanding economy. The people were just starting to move out of kind of not just hill forts, but settlements clustered around hill forts, moving into towns. They had a thriving agrarian economy. They had quite amazing wheat outputs, which, guess what? It's raining today. It helps you grow wheat when water falls out of the sky quite a lot. They were dynamic traders. They traded between themselves. There were about 20 British tribes. They traded between themselves, and they traded with the continent. Items like jet and pearls and pomander, hunting dogs, gold, silver, tin, lead, and slaves. And it's a bit of a clue as to kind of the state of Britain as a society before the Romans arrived. Dynamic, expanding, but not a rural idyll. The tribes weren't in a perpetual state of war. The Romans would tell you that they were, but that suited the Romans' needs. The Romans wanted to get into Britain and take that economy for their own, and therefore, since they were the only people putting the story out, the propaganda was, these barbarians, always at war, we need to get in and pacify them. And it wasn't like that, but you can't put 20 Celtic tribes together in one small island and not have wars. The Celts had a famed warrior class. They'd fight each other. Whoever lost, there'd be POWs taken, prisoners of war, and those people would be traded between them and to the continent. So, I won't say a flawed society, but not a perfect one. The Romans looked across what we now call the English Channel and thought, that would be good. The Romans looked across the Channel and thought, that will do for us. A lot of money went behind their war effort, and they came across, and given that the Romans were past masters at fighting barbarians, and given that the Celtic tribes were pretty easy to divide and conquer, the Romans knocked them over. And what they did then was they lent a lot of money out to people. They'd say, you need all this money because you, as the tribal leader, you must build a big temple to our shared gods. The temple would get built. Yes, I thought you might start taking notes at some point. That's a good sign. So they'd lend a load of money out. They'd wait for the right moment, and then they would, having put very high rates of interest up, they would then say, we need our loan back. And what that turned into was basically a series of land grabs. One of those land grabs, aggravated by some violence that caused the Iceni Rising, which for a moment looked like it might threaten the Roman grip on Britain, but it didn't. And eventually, the Roman emperor and his advisors realized they weren't going about it quite the right way. They calmed the money men down. They put a governor in from Gaul who knew how to do this stuff. He was actually born in Gaul. And basically, we settled down to about 350 years of relative peace. Also, we think, not quite the case actually. If you look at the archaeological record from the late 2nd century, you see a pattern that whenever the Romans wander off, whenever the legions jump on a boat and go off to Europe to fight a civil war, like they did in 197, basically the tribes promptly turn on each other. So you get settlements being burnt out, you find hordes of coins that have been hidden by people who then weren't in the right state to come back for them. And you even see some of the settlements with great big city walls around them. Why would you want a city wall if the entire country is at peace? And I think we can almost look at the Romans as being, I won't overdo the analogy, but a bit like United Nations peacekeepers, kind of frantically trying to keep everyone from each other. And whenever they vanished from the country, some tribes have a go at each other. Notwithstanding 350 years of relative peace, and then the Romans leave. And they leave a bit of a vacuum, which is obviously taken advantage of by various waves of immigrants, the Angles and then the Saxons and eventually even the Normans. And so it's possible to look at Roman rule as being something that opened the country up to exploitation by other peoples from abroad. I think that would have happened anyway. Unless some kind of uber tribe had risen in those 300 years, and it hadn't arisen in the previous 600, unless some kind of great big agglomeration of tribes had happened, and you started to see more of a British people rather than 20 different tribes, And I think Britain was open for the taking at some point by those waves of immigration anyway. But 350 years must make some impact on a country. And this is the point where I'm tempted to do the Monty Python bit.
What did the Romans do for us?
What did the Romans do for us? I'm not going to, at least not in a John Cleese voice. The Romans did a lot of things that I guess could be considered a little bit superficial, and some really big things. So what would I call superficial? Everyone always says roads. There was a road network before the Romans arrived. You can't be a trading people without roads to get your goods to each other and then down to the ports. What the Romans did was they made it a lot better. And they did that for the obvious reason. They wanted to move their legions up and down it in a hurry so they could keep control. The list of what they did from a superficial perspective is enormous. So the use of water, aqueducts, water mills, glass, it goes on and on. But there are three really big things, in my opinion, that the Romans left us. And they're not the obvious things that spring to mind. Everyone looks at the physical. No one thinks beyond that. For me, excuse me, the main three things they left us were, in no particular order, language. They left us the basis of a language that has become the dominant global language. It may not stay that way. You know, we might be, what are we talking, Spanish in 200 years?
Mandarin.
But the basis of Latin, then with German coming in on top of that, and then Scandinavian words coming in on top, and then the French has evolved into an easy to use but very expressive language. 200,000 words in the English language, only 100,000 in the French language. And I believe it was the initial bedrock of Latin to graft all that onto, which is one of their biggest gifts to us. The second one I'd have is connected with language, and that is script. Now, I'm not saying that the Celts never wrote anything down, but it's my belief from what I've read that the Celtic historic tradition was primarily oral. The Roman historic tradition was mainly written. And so you see throughout the Dark Ages the kind of the thin thread, the golden thread of literary history that survives through to the point where we all start reading books. And I would question whether that would have happened without the Roman emphasis on the written word. And the third thing, and this is definitely one for Amanda to have a go at in a bit, I believe that what the Romans did was they took a country with 20 disparate tribes, and they instilled an idea into the people of that country over 350 years, which was of a much more united country. They didn't unite the whole island. The Welsh were never that happy about it, and the Scots did a very, very good job of keeping the Romans at bay. But if you think about an English homeland, then I believe that's where the concept comes, that ideal of a united country. And that's what the subsequent waves of invaders always aspired to. They wanted to take possession of the entire island. And I think that's probably the biggest gift the Romans left us. You know, whether you agree or not, that it's a good thing that there's always been this kind of dream of union and even empire. I think that's what the Romans are responsible for. And for me, that's their biggest legacy. And that's me.